Om Devim Prasanam Pranatarti Hantrim Yogendra Pujam Jugadharma Patrim Tam Sharadam Bhakti Vigyana Datrim Daya Surupam Pranamami Nityam. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. O propitious goddess, killer of misery in souls resigned, savior of religion in every age, by saints and sages worshipped, O mother kind. Grant us love and wisdom, thou, O grace incarnate, to thee we bow. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Shravanyapi Buhu Biryo Nalabhyaha Shinvato Pi Bahavo Yam Navidyuhu Ascharyo Gyata Kushalo Shalabdaha Ascharyo Vakta Kushalo Nushishtaha. Om Shantihi Shantihi Shantihi. Many there are who have never heard of the Atman, the indivisible self, within all things, all beings. Many other, though they hear of it, fail to comprehend it. Wonderful is the one who speaks of it. Blessed is the one who hears of it. But extremely illumined is that one who, having heard of it from the lips of an illumined preceptor, is able to realize it here and now, in this very lifetime. Om peace, peace, peace. Om Sahana, Om Sahana Vavatu, Sahana Bhunaktu, Sahaviryam Karvo Vahai, Tejasvi Navaditamastu Ma Vidvishovahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May Brahman, the reality, protect us. May Brahman sustain us. May Brahman illumine our thinking consciousness. May we not find fault with each other, with the teachings, or with what we study. And may what we study be a source of inspiration to us eternally. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om. Svagatam, welcome everyone to this class, which is the third in a series of our Shakta Advaita Vada series. That is Shakta, Divine Mother of the Universe, and we just chanted to Advaita, non-dual reality, which has its own very wonderful philosophy, and Vada, path. So the path of non-duality as it is evinced or seen through the Divine Mother of the Universe, called Mahamaya, Mahashakti, Parameshini, Mahakali, Durga, many, many beautiful names, hundreds, thousands of beautiful names, or even 1,000 name stotrams to her that are in the scriptures that you go on chanting. And just in reverence to her, because as we've been seeing by the last few classes we've had on Shakta Advaita Vada, and this chart that we've been using as our main chart on your left, we see that she is, her territories, her inward regions, her lokas, her akashas, these are all words for inner worlds, her spandas means vibrational spheres, because this morning we were talking about how vibration runs the gamut from very gross, like a mountain of granite, all the way through to very dull thoughts in the subtle body, and then very refined thoughts, and then the kingdoms of heaven within you, or even deeper inside of you, subtler vibration, and finally all the way up to non-dual reality itself, where just prior to reaching it, the soul encounters the word, which is the unstruck sound, which already means vibration is beginning to disappear. The intellect goes into an indeterminate state, and the mind quits vibrating. Vibration means thought, and thought eventually turns into objects. So you come out of deep consciousness, non-dual consciousness, Advaita, into these differing levels of vibration, and consciousness works its way down, right on down to this earth, in the wriggling of snakes and the buzzing of insects and so forth. Vibration is there in everything. And so we know that there's a life force, prana, that's there in everything. If we can see that much, since prana is here, we won't take it this week, but we'll probably get to it next week. Prana, that life force, man does not live by bread alone, as I've been saying, is this very subtle energy by which one gets a hold of higher levels of vibration. Like capturing a Garuda bird, a dragon bird, and riding it inside on these waves of prana. So in that respect, one would connect oneself up with higher consciousness, and the purveyor of that consciousness would be Divine Mother of the Universe, according to the traditions. The Mother of Wisdom, or the Primordial Goddess, Divine Mother of the Universe. You can also call her by many names in English. She's known, but she's still very, very subtle. Lajya patavritti nityam sharda jnana daike papebhya na shataraksha kripamaya namostute. I just left English, by the way, and I went to Sanskrit. In case you think I'm speaking in tongues, I'm just repeating memorized slokas, swadhyaya, that we memorize from the scriptures so that we can contemplate them without the use of books and letters and pages and so forth, and computer screens, by the way. Be free of those things and be able to just call those up in your head and contemplate on them and open them up and unwrap them, because they are vibration too. These powerful slokas, these powerful words, these mantras, if you will, are very, very subtle and very, very powerful vibrations. And actually last week, you remember, we looked into all of that in the case of Om and Hrim, the bijams that are there at her crown of her head. The first week we looked into Brahmanatman. So Brahman, the non-dual reality, the indivisible ocean of pure conscious awareness without any modification or sublation, and Atman, how it takes on that same essence that takes on various coverings. The first covering it would take on would be the ego, or sense of individual self. It would sort of surreptitiously or in pretend fashion separate itself out from Brahman, like a jar of water from the lake. It would create a container called ego, and it would separate a bit of that essence from itself, from its entirety. And that would be the first covering, called a sheath or a kosha or an upadhi. And then the second one, that's a very subtle sheath, the ego, and then the next would be the intellect, and then the next would be the mind, and then the next would be the prana, this energy we were just talking about, and the final would be the body, the physical sheath. So Atman is that Brahman, only just defined by 5 sheaths. It has taken on coverings. If it takes them on of its own free will, no problem. Water is water, whether it's in a jar or whether it's in a lake. Eventually it'll just break the jar and return to its essence. But if it takes on these coverings out of ignorance, not knowing what it's doing, then there's hell to pay, there's suffering. And the first noble truth, Buddha has to come back and tell you again. Suffering is. And there's a cause for it, and there's a way out of it, and here's the path for it, Ashtangika Marga, the Eightfold Path. So these great teachings and these teachers who espouse them come back to us again and again to remind us that we are Atman, and Atman is one with Brahman. So we looked into all of that with 2 or 3 charts at the first week of this class, 2 weeks ago. Last week we looked at Om and Hrim, the great bijams. And we looked into the fact that if you spell Om in A-U-M instead of O-M, then it's more philosophically sound. That is, you're connecting it with the 3 matras of Om, with waking, dreaming, and deep sleep, and with with gross body, subtle body, and causal body. All these triple teachings that go with AUM, like Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. See, that's why we sing it about once a week, don't we, at these classes? Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwara, Gurur Eva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. It's the Guru Stotram. Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara. Right there you have Brahma, the A of Om, Vishnu, the U of Om, and Devo Maheshwara. Who's that? Shiva, the M of Om. Brahma projects, Vishnu sustains, Shiva brings it all to an end. It's just like you say the word Aum. The M brings everything to a close. That very tiny little bijam then called Om, which is the word of Brahman, the sacred word of Brahman, tells the story for everything. In other words, it tells you the story that everything comes in cycles. And that is why the Atman is taking on these 5 sheaths all the time. It's subjecting itself to cycles. Some beings don't want to do that. They'll just say, I'm going to get liberated. And we'll talk about that today here on this side of the chart, moksha. Moksha is a liberation that's always at hand. It's not something that you can get by practice or after post-mortem emancipation kind of thing. It's something that's always at hand. So it's a state of liberation that is your true nature. It's not something to get or to go after, although we do seek it in a certain sort of way, but that has to be done very carefully. So that state of liberation, moksha, is a part of her great regions. They say she grants the 4 fruits down here, Purusharthas, you see at the foundation of this pillar. It means dharma. She grants dharma. That is, if you want to take on these sheaths, if you want to enter into this vibrational sphere with all its levels, then you should probably come here with the dharma, the teachings first. You should have gotten the teachings, and if you embody with the teachings, then you see these marvelous beings whom you go to and you hear of and you've heard of in the past that have been born like Shankara, whose outline is here at the background of this chart, like Shankara, who is in knowledge of the scriptures by the time he was 10. All the scriptures of India, amazing how many there are. He knew them all by the time he was 10. He had them in his head. And actually that's the point. They were in his head because many lifetimes previously he had been putting them in his head. And his teachers made sure that he had them well established in his mind. That is Gaudapada and Govindapada. And then by the time he was 12, he had left home and he was wandering India, and he found his guru in his early teens, and he had already started writing his great commentations on the Upanishads and the Brahma Sutras and so forth by the time he was in his 20s. So he passed away at 32. So he took this whole potentially 100-year lifetime and just coalesced it down, sort of just condensed it down into these 32 years. And he did that because he was born illumined. See, so to bring the Dharma into life is a wonderful thing. Like the rest of us, maybe we searched around for a long time and luckily came upon it when we were in our 20s, 30s, or even 50s or 60s. Or in the case of my mother, I introduced to it in her 70s and 80s. So whatever the case may be, bringing this Dharma in, that's the foundation of the pillar, you see, these teachings. And then that's the first fruit of life she gives you. And the second fruit is then Kama. If you have Dharma, you can satisfy your desires, and they won't create karmas. Holy Mother said that to us when she was alive. She said, oh, my children, you fear desire. The more desires come and go for you, the better. She's speaking to those children who had taken initiation into Ramakrishna's mantra. So once you've taken the Dharma and taken initiation, then desires come and go. There is nothing to you. You just rolling off thread off of a spool that had been wound on before. And so desires become legitimate, and you easily get rid of them. That is, fulfill them in the Dharma. And then after that is artha, wealth. Wealth doesn't pose a problem to you anymore at that point either, once you have the Dharma. In fact, Sri Ramakrishna said the two ways of using your wealth correctly are to support spiritual organizations and the teachings, and to raise a dharmic family. If you just follow those two rules about wealth, then you're fine. And wealth won't cause that distortion that it does on most minds, so that they're going to be reborn again seeking wealth, instead of born again to seek God. It's enlightenment, however you call God. So these marvelous beings that are actually born in the knowledge of Brahman, those are beings that we look at and admire and laud and follow, try to follow, use them as exemplars. Not saviors so much, but exemplars. So the four fruits of life, the reason I got into it was because it ends in moksha. See, the fourth fruit is moksha. So you get the Dharma, you live your life, you satisfy your desires legitimately, and you get all the wealth you need for your own purposes and to help others, and then you give it all up in the end and you're free. That's a whole different kind of life than what we are seeing people living nowadays, where they're bound at the end of their life. They're bound by fear, they're bound by ignorance of what death is. So many things crowd in on them at the end of their days, or maybe death just takes them by surprise in their youth. Whatever the case, they're not prepared to be ejected out of the body. But the truth of the matter is they're not the body. They're that which produced the body. This energy that produced the body in all bodies would be the next step inward in the kingdoms of heaven within you. So coming into knowledge of all of these facets of Divine Mother reality is going to shore you up in any life in relativity. When Shiva drinks the poison that was leaking out of the process of churning the ocean of wisdom by the gods and the demigods, he was drinking the poison of relativity. You see, any creation is attended by good and bad. It's attended by positivity and negativity, and you can't do away with one and just have the other. As Vivekananda used to say, there's nothing that's all good here, and there's nothing that's all bad. It's all an admixture. It's just that sometimes the positive gets the upper end, you see, and the negativity goes on the wane, and then it turns around and it's the other way. Negativity comes forward and the positivity goes away. And this is always flip-flopping, again, in cycles. So back to this word Om and the liberation that it contains on one side of it, and the possibility for manifestation into bodies on the other side, because this chakra here is two-petaled. One is going in and one is coming out. You see, consciousness goes in and consciousness also comes out. So if it goes in, it's immersion and absorption. If it comes out, it's play, it's divine sport. But Ramakrishna never said anything about suffering, you see, that it should come out and suffer. There are going to be some necessary sufferings for any embodied being. I mean, you could name them almost on one hand: birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and then, of course, death. They're called the 6 transformations. Buddhists call them 6 billows, and they add in their hunger and thirst and so forth, these things that can't be satisfied. So those things you just have to deal with, but if you can deal with them on the yogic level, as a yogi or a yogini, then you can neutralize that poison of negativity like Shiva does, just hold it in the throat, as it were, and never go below the heart, see. And always be a lover of God, and pass your days in peace and bliss, and exit the body free of fear and free of doubt. So, Divine Mother reality with the 4 fruits, this is what she's actually telling you. That's one of the earliest and most basic mother teachings. It's called the Purusharthas, the 4 fruits. I have a chart on that to show you maybe next week or the week after that or the week after that, depending on how long this chart takes us. Before the class started today, we were saying how it could go for maybe a month or two looking at all these different akashas or regions or principles that are affixed there next to her arms and her third eye and her navel and at her feet and so forth. So many things there that are a part of the Vedanta philosophy. And I hope to get to some of those when we get to Astika and Nastika, maybe after the break. But now, to sort of connect us with our last week's class, and a summation has been given. Brahman and Atman were the first, pretty much covered the first class, and Om and Hrim, the two bijams, covered the second class. Before we get into Astika and Nastika or some of these other teachings here, probably Moksha and Kaivalya would be good to take today, and to define those terms and to look into them with charts I have that are in accordance with them. But before we leave the realm of Om and Hrim bijams, I wanted to show you this one chart here, and it happens to be Shankara, this great Advaita Vedantist that we just talked about, who lived to 32 years old. He was about 700 AD in that period, and his teacher's teacher was the great Gaudapada, who did the Karaka on the Mandukya Upanishad, and that Eastern and Western philosophers united, lauded that. That was just such a great work, that commentary on Mandukya Upanishad, because the Mandukya Upanishad is only 12 slokas long, and every sloka is about Om, the word, pretty much. So Shankara would be then rather an expert, and his teacher's teacher was that much in the know about the word. It was master of the word. Remember, AUM also correlates with your waking, dreaming, and deep sleep state. So when you just sit and chant Om, that's going to be a start. It's called Durga Pranava. You have a long recitation of Om. But if you just stand up and walk away, then all you've done is brought a little bit of peaceful vibration into your day. And that might pass, as all things do. But if you sit and meditate on Om, to what these matras of Om, matra means a letter, A, U, and M, what they mean, and then you chant it, it's going to have a much more profound and a deeper effect on your consciousness. It's going to have more staying power. And so you're walking around pretty much seeing Om in everything, that is, seeing everything as Om, as a manifestation of the word. So Shankara's teacher's teacher, Gaudapada, being a master of the three states, means he mastered his waking, his dreaming, and his deep sleep state. And he got into the fourth state called Turiya. Turiya just means the fourth. So you've gone beyond your waking, dreaming, and deep sleep state, means you've gone beyond your gross body, outer body, world. You've gone beyond your subtle body, your mind, and you've gone beyond your causal body, which is the formlessness you feel tonight in deep sleep, or the formlessness you encounter in meditation, if your meditation is deep enough. So the AUNM has a very profound meaning in that regard. So when Shankara talks about Om, you can really feel the weight, the profundity, and the authenticity and the authority behind it. Let's look into his 9-step process of meditation on Om. This is how he wants you to get to know the word better. So remember, we're here. You are here. If you're looking at a star map, as far as all the millions of galaxies in Divine Mother's atmospheric sky, we are just then doing a final rendering of this principle called bijam, or seed, powerful seed, how everything can be contained in a sound or in a word, in a vibration. All meaning, all objects, everything is there in that little tiny seed. So looking at this, the first thing he wants you to do is get ekasana established. Get a position. There are 3, 4, 5 main positions in asana that the Divine Mother advises you in her scripture. She doesn't want you to go into hundreds and hundreds. There's 5 of them which you can do: half lotus, full lotus, vajrasana. Basically, there are these different 4 or 5 different asanas that are best. But say if you sit like this and spread your legs like this, the kundalini is already coming up. Now, for those of you who fear God, then never sit like this. See, because the minute you sit like this, your consciousness is going to start to awaken. You may not even know it yet. But if you sit and open up the root chakra back there by sitting in a position like this, like everyone from the American Indians to the Eastern Indians in India itself sat in, then you're already beginning to awaken an energy up the spine. And then if you add some consciousness to that, some meditation, some ingesting of sacred food, prasad, not only physical food but scriptural food, then she's going to get attracted to that. That she is that energy at the base of the spine that wants to awaken in you and take this journey upwards, which is really inwards, towards these higher chakras, including the third eye, which is very key and pivotal. So that's the first thing we could say. Ekasana means one asana. So find the asana in which you can sit the longest and be the less disturbed, the least amount of disturbance or distraction, where you can sit and hopefully for an hour or two get a glimpse of that inner terrain, any part of it. And if you don't have a mantra yet, Om is the bijam that is powerful. Even if you don't have a mantra, Om is very effective in awakening consciousness, because that is the root vibration we're talking about here. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. I keep having to repeat that because we're in a Christian country here, and you have to know that there's a lot more to, when Jesus told John about the Word, there's a lot more to the Word than just those few things he said. You have to go deeper into Christ's teachings, and of course Vedanta is going to be a good way of casting a laser-like light on those early teachings of Jesus. I also, rather than just list the 9 phases of practice on Om, put quotes with them. He says himself, that is Shankara, the real posture is that one in which meditation flows spontaneously and unceasingly. Absorption in the uniform Brahman should be known as the equipoise of the limbs. Well, immediately we start thinking about Patanjali, because he has those problems of dukkha, dharmanasya, angame jayatva, and shasha prasvashaha. The third one is called anga me jayatva, anga, limbs, uncomfortableness of the limbs, unsteadiness of the limbs. You don't know what to do with your legs and arms, you see. See, people have even gone so far as to get little elbow braces, you see, so they could, made out of wood, so they can just sit there and their arms can just not bother them anymore. See? But basically, if you just put the right hand over the left and place it right there just below the navel on your lap comfortably, then that's a very good position for your arms to be. That's the meditation pose of Vivekananda in his famous meditation picture, which is on our altar. And you also see Holy Mother doing it there in her own version of it. She's got kind of a oval connected the fingers to the thumbs. When Ramakrishna meditates, she's got everything integrated. His meditation is like this, you see. I always think about that as the 3 mudras of our teachers, SR and V, SRV associations. But back to the arms. In other words, limbs can be very restless. Angame jayatva, Patanjali calls it. So just before the class, one of my students said, there's a beautiful article that you wrote, Babaji, back in an early Nectar issue, and it was about Shankara's commentary on Patanjali's 8 limbs. So that's what brings it to mind here, too, is that if you can get into a single posture and your mind can flow easily and spontaneously, and your limbs can be at rest, that is your legs and arms can be completely at rest, then you can distance yourself from the body. You can become detached from your body. Don't worry about teachings that say you have to eschew the body or somehow get rid of the body. What you're doing is just using it as a nice station, a platform. And you can just then ease your way off it, just like you do tonight in sleep. You just simply lift off the body and senses, don't you? And so it's very natural. You should think of it like that. Very natural. You're usually not attended with fear when you go to sleep. So why should you be attended with fear when you meditate? You're not going to leave the body until the predestined time. That's her business. That's not for you to worry about. So what you want to do is just get yourself in that nice position, one posture. And if you're practicing a lot of postures, Start trimming them down to that one that works for you. Don't get caught in the Hatha Yoga hypnotism, you see, of many, many postures, because you might develop asanavasana. Asanavasana samskara, they call it. The Gyanis say the Hatha Yogis get caught in the desire for many asanas, asanavasana, and then they don't get on with the process of getting into meditation. In other words, there are asanas of the mind that are much more important than the asanas of the body. And if you can uncover these asanas of the mind, these positions, like the yamas and yamas and so forth, then you can rest your mind in equipoise, and then the body will follow. But if your mind is restless, your body will also be restless. Isn't it the case? So they tend to go towards the crux of the problem, which is manas, mind. Manas connected with what? Chitta, thought. Chitta connected with what? Intelligence, buddhi. Buddhi connected to what? Ego, ahamkara. That's the fourfold mind. You've got an ego, you've got intelligence, you've got thought, and you've got a dual mind in this complex. So what you want to do is make yourself and make that mind into a peaceful mind. You need peace of mind first and foremost, she said. So with this, for those of you who just tuned in or just walked in, we are looking at the 9-step process of meditation on the word Om, as is finishing up this part of the basic chart, standard chart we're looking at. So to conclude that, one posture where mind and thought flows spontaneously and unceasingly, and where limbs are rested and body is rested. That's ekasana. He wants you to start with that in your 9-step process of meditation on Om. Number 2, do japa. Recitation of Om and contemplation of its meaning. So it's not just like the parrot. You teach the parrot Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, and it says it probably more than you do every day. But it just reverts to its death squawk when the cat gets a hold of it, and it forgets the mantra. So the mantra didn't go very deep, you see. So you have to bring consciousness to the mantra. What's that mean? Intelligence. What's that mean? Contemplation. You have to put some energy of your own intelligence onto that mantra or that bijam and find out what it means. I can't emphasize that enough, and I also can't say how unhappy I am at the plight of people who don't use their intelligence, who don't look into the meaning of words and scriptures, and who think that they can just do away with them and then try and live a spiritual life. Not going to happen. You've got to destroy ignorance with knowledge. Everyone said that. Shankara said it, Ramakrishna said it. Guess who else said it? Krishna in the Gita says it. Nahi gyanena sadrishyam pavitram miha vidyate. There is no purifier in the world for ignorance like knowledge, Arjuna. So you get rid of ignorance by knowledge. You take one thorn out of the flesh with the other thorn, and then you can throw them both away, not until. So you want to look into Bible, Quran, Veda, Gita, all these scriptures, before you can transcend them, before you can go beyond them. And going beyond them really meaning taking the essence of Gita and Bible and Quran with you into this meditation. These accompany you. These thoughts accompany you. You don't just go void all of a sudden and there's nothing. Wisdom is her nature. The light of wisdom is her nature. You're shining it on God. That's how God gets illumined to the darksome or the benighted mind, is by using this intelligence like a laser and shining it inward. The senses are rather like lasers going outwards, especially when they're focused. But the inward senses that espy the kingdoms of heaven within, they're more like inward lasers that begin to look at subtle realms of intelligence. This is all made of intelligence. You can walk around the physical world and look at objects and saying, that's my own intelligence, that's my own intelligence, that's my own intelligence. Everything is mind made manifested. The Zen Buddhists say it, the Tibetan Buddhists say it, the Vedantists say it, the yogis say it. Are we going to disbelieve with that kind of authority behind it, that everything is mind made manifest, that all objects come from you, that all of the universe is in you? Is this just fine New Age philosophy? No, this is the fact of the matter, because it's all vibration. And the primal vibration is here, Om. And you'll hear that humming inside of your deepest consciousness. Even when you go to sleep, if you're aware, you'll hear it take over everything and turn everything into formlessness. And when you come back out of sleep, you'll see how it all posits form again, congeals form again. So AUM, really, isn't it? Projection, sustenance, and withdrawal. Constantly doing that, all the time. You're projecting, you're sustaining, you're withdrawing. Just like a kid on a beach builds a sandcastle, enjoys it, and watches the tide destroy it. All in one 24-hour period. But it doesn't take you that long to destroy the worlds of name and form and time and space. You can do it by closing your eyes, and 30 seconds later it's gone, and you're in deep sleep. Or better yet, you're in samadhi. And Om is still there, you see, vibrating as the primal sound, the unstruck sound. So he wants you to look into this, obviously, because he's given you 9 steps. Now, when he says recitation of Om and contemplating its meanings, I found this quote by Swami Vivekananda. He says, the first letter A is the root sound, the key, pronounced without touching any part of the tongue or palate. So A is going to be your waking state. That's key to us, right? We create our karmas here, and we also can destroy our karmas here. We cannot do that in dream. You do not create karmas in dream, nor do you destroy them in dream. In fact, the only dream that's really going to cause any change in your consciousness, if now at all, is going to be the dream of called a vision, a spiritual vision, where you come in contact with a great soul who's thinking about you, and you're open to his thought or her thought, and all of a sudden God shows him or herself to you. And that's called that's a very, very high level of vision. Really not much of a dream, doesn't really a word that covers that kind of a vision, but it's not in the waking state. So, because you're not going to see God in the waking state, you're going to see reflections of God there, chittabhasa, reflections of that intelligence. But when you go inside, you have more and more of a chance of coming upon a spiritual form filled with light, an ishtam, an ishtadevata, a guide, a spiritual guide, however you call it in whatever tradition you're following. So A is the root, and he goes on to M first. M represents the last sound in the series, being produced by the closed lips. Then U rolls from the very root to the end of the sounding board of the mouth. Repetition of Om and meditating on its meaning is the way. You know, Vivekananda brought us many things. He brought us teachings of Vedanta, he brought us teachings in yoga, the Raja Yoga, he brought us teachings of Tantra, he brought us the 4 yogas, Karma, Bhakti, Jnanam, and Raja Yoga. But now he's saying this meditation on the word is the way. See, let's go down here to early to see our own founders saying. Lex Hixon, also called Ramakrishna Bowell in our Vedantic tradition, he says, after traveling the path of Om, the silent source is reached, and the yogi becomes a realized sage dwelling in the one reality. All happens by traveling the path of Om. See? Path of Om then doesn't mean just sit and say Om, oh, am I enlightened yet? No, you connect it with your waking state, your dreaming state, and your deep sleep state, and you follow that path. These are your states of consciousness. AU and M is giving you permission to accent or light up those levels of your own consciousness that you walk around day to day never seeing. All you're seeing is the waking state. Or you're looking out into space. So you're under an ocean, or digging up moldering bones on the earth. See? What about this inner periphery? That's the land to discover within you, the kingdom of heaven within you. My Father's mansion has many chambers. See, that's worth seeking out, because that's where your true self abides. So traveling the path of Om, acknowledged by so many traditions. All the great founders of the traditions mention this great word. Now, japa then takes on a much wider meaning then, doesn't it? And usually we think of japa as getting a mantra from a guru and just saying it over and over again with the beads. And of course that's a way of focusing in on lessening all the distracting vibrations and focusing on one powerful vibration, like a tidal wave sucks all of the little waves into it. So that's a great practice. But japa itself, Holy Mother said, and she was called Japa Harini, perfect in the art of japa. That was the name they gave her. She said even that is just a method. It's not an end. So you come more to an end when you connect the mantras of Om, because if you leave the mantras of Om disconnected, there's ignorance. If you connect the mantras of Om, there's knowledge. See? So it's a great quote by an ancient rishi. Pipalada was his name. If you leave the mantras of Om unconnected, there's ignorance. If you connect them, there's knowledge. So, in other words, you're leaving your waking, dreaming, and deep sleep state unconnected. You're leaving your gross, your subtle, and your causal body unconnected. If you make these connections of these triputis, all of a sudden there's knowledge, and you're free, you're fine, you're in harmony, you're in balance, you're in equipoise, you have equanimity, you have sattva. I can keep borrowing words to explain it, but you must get the idea. So japa takes on a very wide meaning in Shankara, in an Advaitist's way of thinking. There's Shankara, and he's young. He was only 32 years of age he lived. Now the third step is manana, silent repetition of Om in the mind. Sri Krishna says in the Gita, uttering the monosyllable Om, Brahman, thinking of me, that one who departs, just transcending the body, attains the supreme goal. So you want it there at the time of death. You want it there before death. And you want it there by setting up your physical body in one position. See? So as soon as you set in that ekasana position, you've opened up the Muladhara chakra, consciousness is beginning to rise. You should start to hear the Om before too long, if you haven't already. Maybe you're sitting in that posture because you already heard Om. Like I say, I heard it in the crib. See, I remember one of my most profound early postnatal experiences was hearing the Om in the crib, and it frightened me. I put it together with a cyclic whirling that was going on inside of me. And frightened me, and I cried, and my mother came in the room and turned on the light, and that's the last thing I remember. See? So, mother comes, you see. As soon as you see Om, she will come. And you'll hear that, so you might have gotten interested a long, long time ago. You might have already found your guru and he's just waiting to come into your life. See, many people are working their way towards that almost predestined position where all of those elements are going to come together. They must persevere in order for that to happen. So this is a process that can quicken or swiffen spiritual evolution. The quote there by Krishna then says it all. He says, Om is Brahman. So that is the word, the bijam for Brahman. Hrim would be one of the bijams for Shakti, for Mother. But Om would be the non-dual word, the word that's going to take you into formlessness. And you'll also come back into form via the word. Step 4, Nishchaya Dardyam, inner affirmation. Sri Ramakrishna says, I compare Om to the sound of a bell that dissolves in silence. The relative universe dissolves in the imperishable absolute, the great source, the great silence. I have experienced this infinite ocean of bliss and consciousness, and Mother has shown me how innumerable worlds issue from it and return to it. I've never found a quote, especially in contemporary times, such a clear rendering of everything coming out of the word and going back into it. Whole worlds, whole universes, always vibrating in the word and coming into being and then moving into formlessness, back and forth. The perplexing prospect for us is that time gets into the equation, you see, and stretches it out. And when you're in the embodiment in the physical body, time is slowed down vastly, and very hard to get anything done. It's like molasses in wintertime, they say, trying to walk through that. So in the physical conditions, very difficult to make any swift progress in this. So that's why you want to slough off the physical. See? Not just death, but you can do it by disidentifying with the human form and shutting down the senses. This swiftens the process, you see, quickens evolution. And now you can get glimpses of things that you could never get when you're attached to objects in body and senses. You see where I'm going with that. Difference between a worldly person's attachment to pleasures and objects and a spiritual person or an aspirant's attachment on things like the kingdoms of heaven within. There's a whole shifting of consciousness there, which all of a sudden brings spiritual potentials and possibilities to the fore immediately. You can have those fruits quickly if you have the intensity and the courage of your convictions. So, Nishchaya Darjam, Nishchaya means resolved. So you have to have a certain resolution around this declaration for freedom. I will realize freedom because it's my true nature. So all these worlds, innumerable worlds, issue from it and return to it. Why do you think Christ said then, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God, to John? He was telling him pretty much everything in a nutshell, wasn't he? A pregnant saying that John had to go to the Garden of Gethsemane and meditate on for a while because it's very deep in its implications. Now, fifth step is ekagrata. There's that word eka again, means one in Sanskrit. Freedom from distractions. The Mundaka Upanishad says, Om, the mystic sound, is the bow, the self within is the arrow, and Brahman is the target. One should hit that mark with an undistracted mind. It's fleshed out in another Upanishad, Danur Grihitva Upanishadam Mahastram Sharam Hyupasanashita Sanjayita Ayamya Tad Bhavgatena Chetasa Laksham Tad Evaksharam Somya Vidhi. Taking as bow that mighty weapon furnished by the scriptures, non-dual scriptures, fasten to it the mind, the arrow of mind made sharpened by thoughts on reality alone. So before you even draw the bow, you have to sharpen the mind by concentrating on reality. Then put it into the bow of the scriptures. Then release and penetrate the mark, Brahman. You already know Brahman exists because your teacher told you so. So with that nishchaya, with that faith, with that resolve, you're going to go and find Brahman. You know the story. One archer aiming at the fish, you see. Another archer aiming at the fish, another archer aiming at the fish. The archery teacher comes around and says, what are you aiming at? The body of the fish. Second archer, what are you aiming at? The eye of the fish. Teacher's pleased. See. Third archer, what are you aiming at? My arrow's already in the fish. Before he even shot it, it's there. There's the superior practitioner. He knows Brahman exists because the teacher already told him. Just a matter of finding out for himself now. And so he's got perfect resolution. It's one of the Eightfold Path of Buddha, perfect resolution. And so he goes forward and he's going to attain that in this lifetime, or die trying. And if he dies trying, he'll be coming back with the Dharma. Like I started out saying at class, you see, he'll be coming back again with the Dharma. He'll be very ready in his next assault on that citadel of non-dual truth. That's the ultimate goal. Gatam, Paragatam, Buddha called it. Beyond all other goals, that's the Paragatman, the supreme goal. And Krishna says, to that goal they go whether they never return again. They go to Brahman. They go to me. So, which Upanishad you look at always talks about that. In this case, it's Om is the mystic sound, and that's the bow, and self is the arrow, and Brahman is the target. Hit it with an undistracted mind. Now the sixth step of meditation on Om, I hope you can all write this down and go home, and then in your meditation tomorrow, sit down and say, okay, here's the first step. Settle yourself, your arms, in whatever posture you prefer. If you have to sit in a chair, all right, but make sure that your legs are in this position maybe and your back is straight, you see. Don't lean back on anything, no supports. Brahman doesn't have any supports, so you should have no supports. If you want to be absolutely free, no supports. So, assume the position, as they say. And then go out right on down the list in your meditation, you see, and just practice Om. Memorize this and then do it without the paper the next day. You see, what was that step again? Oh yes, this is what I should be doing. And actually participate in your own awakening. What a novel idea, you see, that you should actually be a participant in your own awakening. That you should actually be conscious of consciousness, aware of awareness. I was talking in this vein one day, and one of my students went home, and he lived in this complex, you see, and everywhere along all the fences of this complex was a sign, beware of dog, beware of dog, beware of dog. See, and dogs were barking everywhere. See. So he went into his computer and typed out in big words a bunch of signs and put them up in the fence around his place. It said, be aware of God, be aware of God, be aware of God. He actually did this. You'll probably go there on Oahu in one community and you'll see those signs still up. Now the sixth step here, anashakti, detachment from objects. Now here Shankara is getting to a very deep and sometimes unsettling and procrastination part of your meditation, is that you become happy with your meditation if you have happy objects in it. Other days you have klistavrittis, but some days you have aklistavrittis. So that's Patanjali's teaching. Klistavrittis are erratic vibrations that don't make you happy, but aklistavrittis are vibrations that make you happy, you see. So you're going back and forth in your meditation between these two. And you're supposed to get rid of the klista, the unhappy, with the aklista, the happy or positive. And then you're supposed to get beyond the positive too. Yoga takes you beyond dualities. That's the beauty of Vedanta. So in that case then, here Shankara is kind of bringing that into the 9-step process of meditation when he says that you need to, as the quote says here, meditate on the Supreme Purusha with the sacred word. Om is free from all concerns, even as smoke is free, even as the snake is freed from its slough. So, the Supreme Purusha then is beyond dualities. Purusha means basically indweller in the city of 9 gates. So, that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, right? You have 9 openings, apertures in the body, but there's an indweller in there that's operating them. Nobody ever thinks about that. The power of the eyes to see, the power of the ears to hear, the power of the nose to smell, and so forth. See, they're just taken for granted. See, oh, it's just the senses. Well, who's operating these senses anyway? You see, because my senses, as Krishna says, in a chariot with 5 horses, you have 5 senses. Each one can take a different route, and then, I'm destroyed, and I can't concentrate. So that's the case here in your meditation. You need to get these 5 senses aligned, and then turn them into an inward path instead of just an outward path. Because when you take the consciousness that's behind the senses and congeal them, it's a very great power. And if you can do it for a long time, it's even a greater power, say the way a monk or a nun would do. So I would just go into retreat and not think of anything but God. Sharpen the mind, you see, before you put it into the bow. So you think of nothing but thoughts of reality alone. And then that means you're turning off your senses and collecting the power from the senses and storing it up. That's yoga in its essence. It's a storing up of power. Prana, basically, once you get a hold of that first in yoga, unless you've already gotten a hold of it, of course. So, anasakti, detachment from objects, its practical teaching is that that's going to spoil your bid for non-duality. You really, the best meditation is where time goes away and space goes away and all thought goes away, and all that's left is you, the self. Call it what you will, Buddha nature, pragyaparam, supreme intelligence. All that's left is that consciousness, and it's without any supports, and it's blissful, and you like that bliss. See, it's peace, and you like that peace. It's love, and you like that love, and now you have it in spades. You see, there's nothing interrupting it. Uninterrupted, unalloyed, they say. That's the way we want the Atman. That's what the Swamis say. We want our bliss of Atman to be uninterrupted and unalloyed. That is, not mixed with anything else and never interrupted. That's what's spoiling mankind's bid for contentment. That his so-called happiness is always getting interrupted, isn't it? By so many little things, distractions. Can never have it just the way you want it. Well, that's the way of the world. So, as we were saying this morning in satsang, you detach from the world, you renounce the world, and then you find the self and you dwell on the self, and then you come back to the world, and the world cannot affect the self. How does Krishna put it in the Gita? Those beings who do not what's the best word for that? Distract or disturb, maybe disturb. Those beings who do not disturb the world and whom the world cannot disturb, those are my children, Krishna says. So you don't disturb the world and the world can't disturb you. So you've got that kind of solid, resolved detachment in hand, you see, and then you're steady in that, like Shiva is in wisdom. Unmoving and uninterrupted and unalloyed. So this quote from the Prajnopanishad is that Om is freed from all concerns. So that's really what they're saying. It's a very mild way of putting it, because it's permeated with bliss, joy, compassion, and all these other good qualities. So that's only going to come when you can detach yourself from objects. Remember, at this level, it's thoughts of objects. And you should have gotten over the objects when you sat. You see, when you sit like this, that's already saying, I'm sitting to do yoga, isn't it? And yoga means oneness, and this is trueness and manyness out here. So I'm already putting forth my bid for just non-objectivity. I want to know the eternal subject, not the changing objects. So if I set myself in that position and I concentrate on the eternal subject, then one of the things that's going to spoil my equanimity is thoughts of objects. They're going to return on me because it's habit, because it's karma, because it's samskaras. And like I say, a lot of people don't think about that when they're in meditation. They come out of meditation and say, I had a good meditation. And you might ask them, you see, what was your good meditation containing? Oh, really good thoughts of good, pleasant things. See? So meditation, you would say, probably isn't very deep, and number one, and number two, it's going to change. See that same person 2 or 3 days later, and they're unhappy and depressed, you see, without fail. So, I mean, I know some people I teach meditation to, as it were, because it's not really something that's easily taught. And they're immediately in a great state. And I say, wow, that's beautiful. A lot of my other students wish that they could get that, and they haven't even got that after 5 years. But then you see that person about a month later, and they're just fallen out, you see. So their first taste of meditation is just so beautiful. It's just the timing was so perfect, you see. The cycle came around just perfect for them to meet their teacher and learn meditation. But then, the lotus opens in the sun, but Ramakrishna says, but when a cloud passes in front of it, it can't bear it, and it closes, see. So when the least little problem comes in their life, their meditation goes sour. And it's gone. Maybe for months, for years, they can't get that back. So as a teacher, I learned that. So very impressed by certain people in their meditation, and see them a couple months later and they're fallen out of yoga completely and are having all sorts of problems. And they wish they could get back to that equanimous state, you see. So this is a process that you gain control of the mind. And when you get to this process of the sixth step, he's taking you to the real problem of meditation is subtle, thinking of subtle objects, not being able to get your mind vrittyless, free of vibrations. You can get it to the state maybe of pleasant vibrations, but you can't get it to the state of no vibrations very easily. I took extra time on that because it's an important step. 7 is navasamskara sunyata, extinction from samskaras. Lord Patanjali, our father of yoga, says, the force of past impressions continue to create a physical reality, such as illness, health of the body, and other regular operations, until the force of the new impressions of samadhi being created on the mind burn these out completely. So until you can start having sampragyata samadhi, samadhis of peace, samadhis of knowledge, samadhis of bliss, those aren't the highest samadhis, by the way, but they are efficacious in as far as they can remove the samsaras of illness and health. Now I'm healthy, now I'm ill. Well, I'm healthy again, now I'm ill. Don't you feel that in 24 hours? Your body is healthy and then it's ill? You feel illness passing across your body every 24 hours. You're not perfectly healthy all day. Little indigestion, little whatever it is, you see. What to speak of the mind, being healthy all the time. So these things are coming and going in cycles all the time, and that's the nature of the thing. You're not to blame yourself for that in yoga. You're to step back and notice it and then detach from good and bad, from pleasure and pain, from life and death, from embodiment and disembodiment, from form and formlessness. All these dualities, that's you're able to see them now. And that's your chance to detach from them and become the witness. And that witness is Om. That Om is here. That's the third eye, and you're the seer when you're there. You're the knower of the three states of waking, dreaming, and deep sleep. Not the slave of a waking state only, but the knower of all three states. So, samskara is a key word there. See, it means impressions, subtle impressions in the mind caused by past actions of past lifetime, unresolved karmas of past lifetimes. Samskara, incredibly important word that should be taken into the context of Western psychology now, so that they can get out of this, out of the box of one lifetime scenario and begin explaining the problems of everyday life and the impediments that the soul is facing in terms of many lifetime scenario. Now, Patanjali also says that that which goes in line with the klista and aklista vrittis again. The klista vrittis are good thoughts, pleasant thoughts. Klista vrittis are negative thoughts. Yes, you do use one to get rid of the other, but then you don't just say use thoughts of health to get rid of illness, because basically the yogi knows that all health is in the mind and all illness is in the mind, so he can use the mind to offset his illness and stay in health. That's why he or she, yogi or yogini, is able to keep healthy all the time, and when ill health does come forward, can use power of the will to control it. I suggest Swami Abhedananda's books on psychic phenomena and on karma. He explains it best on how to use the yogi uses the mind to stay in a state of healthfulness all the time and get rid of all illnesses without medicines, without anything, just purely with the force of will. That's how enlightened mind would tackle those problems. And also live as long as it wants, or as short as it wants. In the case of Shankara, 32 years was enough. Now, extinction of samskaras, something we need to work at. part of the processes of spiritual life are neutralizing karmas and resolving these samskaras in the mind. The way he says to do it is to replace them with samskaras of samadhi. So I would say, if you're having difficulty in life, then you start practicing sadhana, and you're going to replace the difficulties of life with the difficulties of sadhana. And when you can master sadhana, that is, keep up a practice day to day, where you're putting more and more of your time on these yogas, bhakti, jnana, karma, so forth, then you begin to replace, without even knowing it, the difficulties of life, till sometime a year, 2, 3 years later, you all of a sudden think, hey, those difficulties I was suffering from are gone. You don't see them go away. You just all of a sudden realize you're free of them. And because they were never real in the first place, it makes sense that you would not see them go away, you see. They don't have any real basis, any basis in reality. None of that does. Reality is something completely transcendental and completely formless and free of all of these overlays. So you're working in the realm of overlays, modifications, first. And so you're going to have to replace negativity with positivity, old with new, and so forth. Laziness with willpower. So that's how he says these samskaras get replaced by better samskaras and better samskaras. That will become more apparent when I show you the chart on Kaivalya, which we will see probably after the half, at the break. Now let's finish this chart up. You can see first 9 steps seem like pretty simple, but with my explanation here of each step, you can see how deep it can go and should go. Purva samskara sakshitvam is next, witnessing past samskaras. So if you can render your present samskaras nil or neutral, then you can begin to see these past samskaras. What Shankara says about that, back to him, is it is the self-effulgent witness of all who is manifested in the sheath of the intellect. Keeping in view that which is separate from the manifested and the unmanifested, by one undivided thought, think of that always. Now he's giving us a clue into this one-pointedness of mind that is so coveted by the illumined souls, and which we find ourselves bereft of quite often. Krishna says that in the Gita too. He says, in fact, we had it at Tutu's the other night when we were chanting the Gita, chapter 2 in Samkhya Yoga. We were chanting it with tamboras, and some of you were there present. And Krishna said in that, he said, single-branched is the decisions of the wise, but many-branched are the decisions of the unwise. Very beautiful sloka. So if you're a wise person, your decision is always single-branched. You know the truth, you decide on it, you follow it, you get it. There's none of this other confusion accompanying you at all, ever. So you've got a very focused consciousness in that case. But many-branched are the decisions of the unwise. So they're always going along different roads, finding a dead end, coming back, starting over, and therefore they're always casting about. You find this in the case of souls coming into the body and never finding their guru or their path until very late in the game, if ever. And in the meantime, they've practiced spiritual menu tasting all the way along the line, you see. Or they're running from one guru to the next, like groupies, like spiritual groupies at a spiritual rock concert, you see. So it's very, very rare to see somebody get a focus, come into life with that kind of resolve and say, there's my path, there's my teacher, dedicate yourself. And dive deep, O mind, into the ocean of God's beauty and descend to the uttermost depths and find the gem of self-realization. That's very rare that you'll find a soul in this day and age doing that. But you know, there are many hundreds and thousands of monks out there, and they've done it. We need to see a few people here in the householder department, you see, having done it and accomplished it too. Find your path, settle into it, reach the highest goal. Gatam, gatam, paragatam. So Shankara says there, the witness is hidden in your sheath of your intellect. So your intelligence, you see, Mother loves intelligence most of all. That rids itself of ignorance. They asked Shankara once, how do you prefer your vision of God? And he says, unsullied, like a mirror that's polished every day. If you don't polish the mirror of the mind, then little dust specks and dirt contaminants collect on it, and you can still see yourself, but you've got little imperfections in the vision. He says, I prefer my vision of God perfect. Like the mirror of the mind has to be wiped clean every day. So this means that an enlightened soul like Shankara still goes in and cleans the mind. You know, the two very important things come out in that saying. One is that mind is not your soul. If you're thinking your mind is the soul, then you're wrong. The mind is a station, is a sheath. He calls it a sheath here. So there's a witness of your mind. Call it God's mind, if you will, but God also has a witness to his mind. His mind is Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, you see, the Trinity, and he stands beyond that as witness. So there's always a deeper level to Sakshi Bhutam, you see, and pretty much what we're talking about here, Sakshitvam, right? The witness. There's always a deeper level to the witness that you can go to, and that is your practice at a very high level of meditation on Om, is finding that witness and staying with it. And he's giving you the key here that it's connected mostly with your intelligence. They don't call her the mother of wisdom for nothing, or Shankara Shiva, is the god of wisdom, right? So wisdom is a very, very important part of the practice right now, since we are in charge of our body-mind mechanism. Body-mind mechanism is the psychophysical being is another way Vedanta describes your sheaths, your 5 sheaths. Psychophysical being, you see. At a distance, they're saying, oh, that's your body-mind mechanism. So they're mechanisms, they're not you. So they're not going to stop like Yoga 101, say, oh, you're not the body. That's a teaching for children. You should know you're not the body. They're going to just, if you come into a Vedantic circle or a Buddhist circle, your body-mind mechanism, your psychophysical being, they're pointing to something that's not you, but something that you're operating. See? So witness is the operator of that, and it's detached witness too. So that's what you want to get a hold of, in touch with, in union with. Yoga is that witness consciousness. Beautiful Shankara bringing that out and giving you the key to unlock it with. Sheath of intellect. Where is my intellect? Unlock that. What's inside? Intelligence. I'm free. See? I'm free when I know my intelligence, when I can turn my intelligence against the world and see that this is all a manifestation of intelligence. God is here. They say Brahman is here in everything. How do you understand that? Because Brahman is not a thing. It's not an object. It's the intelligence in the thing. It's what made the thing appear. It's what gives the foundation for the thing to exist upon. Anything. Everything. So that's how you understand the non-dual statement. You don't assign Brahman to an object, of course. Brahman can't be an object. It's the eternal subject. It's the only thing that isn't an object. I mean, the mind is having trouble with objects, isn't it? When it's meditating. What else is keeping it from getting free? So the eternal subject is another word for this witness. Now the 9th and final step is Atmanishta. Nishta is a precious word in Vedanta. It means pretty much one-pointedness. We call it Ishtanishta. If you find your ideal, then you get 100% absolute devotion and fidelity to that ideal. And that ideal can be with form, or it can be beyond form, or it can be to a guru, or it can be to the supreme guru that is the witness consciousness in your own being, or it can be both. Probably better to the more the better. You see that the more the better means happier if you have both an ishtam that's with form and beyond form. So the quote here we already read by our founder Lex Hickson. After traveling the path of Om, the silent source is reached, and the yogi becomes a realized sage dwelling in that one reality. You'll find that in the Coming Home book. You'll find that in the Great Swan book that he wrote. So 9 stages of meditation on Om. I thought we would end the crown here of her head, Om and Hrim, with that teaching, which we haven't seen for a long time. That's a very old chart. Now, in the time remaining, which is 5 or 10 minutes maybe?
10.
10 minutes, let's look into these 2 opposite pillars. We can start to cast out from her to these 2 great pillars, and they have very precious teachings in them. Nirguna and Saguna Brahman, this Brahman with attributes, Brahman beyond attributes. Astaka and Nastika, the traditional philosophies of India and the non-traditional philosophies of India, both which have a lot to offer us. You see the gunas are here, we'll come upon that. And you see on the sides of each of these pillars, Savikalpa Samadhi, also called Sampragyata, and Nirvikalpa Samadhi, also called Asampragyata. That's Samadhi with form and Samadhi beyond form. There are several of these kinds of Samadhis. There's only one of these. And then these attending pillars here, Aparinama and Ajativada. You've heard me talk about that in non-duality. Aparinama means non-transformation, and Ajativada means no birth, no death. So these are attending pillars on these great samadhis and on these great axioms of God with attributes and God without attributes. Vedanta covers the whole gamut and brings it all in for inspection and for speculation. Therefore, we might as well look at these pillars at the very top, and since we're coming out of Om and Hring, look at Kaivalya and look at Moksha. Now, Kaivalya, this chart I created from one of my students who happened to be in prison at the time, and I went into prison teaching and got very interested in the Vedanta and became a very good student, and drew this by hand in his cell with a lead pencil and sent it to me because he imagined that's what I was like. He said, "Oh, you live in Hawaii, and I'll portray you like this, sitting on the edge of the sand, meditating on the ocean of Brahman, as it were." So I thought it was very lovely, and wished very, very much that I could be just like that. Absolutely in meditation on the ocean. Not just the liquid ocean, but the symbolic ocean that it portrays. But I use this then as a backdrop for the 7 steps of attainment to Kaivalya. Now this is a teaching out of yoga. The teaching of meditation on Om was out of Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, a gift from Shankara. This is Patanjali, the father of yoga. Of course, yoga was in existence long before he was, but he really did a marvelous job of systematizing yoga into 8 limbs at a very late date. We figure probably 500-600 years after Buddha, maybe 150 years after Christ. Patanjali was there and brought this whole yogic panorama into an 8-limb system. We've taken that chart before, the tree of yoga, and I've showed you the limbs and so forth. We've had whole retreats on that. So very profound. It's actually called Raja Yoga, the kingly yoga, or kingly road. It's also called Ashtanga, which means 8, 8-limbed. Anga, remember your limbs, your restless limbs. So also could be used as Ashtanga, 8-limbed yoga, which includes everything from posture all the way up to Sampragyata Samadhi. Now, Kaivalya, beautiful Sanskrit word. Sometimes you hear it defined as samadhi itself. And I'm sure that it would probably include in it samadhis of knowledge, samadhis of bliss, samadhis of ripened ego, those kinds, samadhis of peace, those kinds of samadhis would be in Kaivalya. But sometimes they use it just as the ultimate samadhi itself. But Patanjali uses it as a penultimate samadhi. And it's obvious in the sutras when you study them, which we have been doing via the email for 5 or 6 years now. We're almost to the end of that study, and anyone can join that they want. We're taking sloka by sloka, all these wonderful sutras of Patanjali, and in the 4 padas, the 4 sections, and studying them very deeply. And we're in the third pada right now, and we've already had some teachings on Kaivalya. And if you remember from that, Kaivalya is a penultimate state of consciousness, of realization of consciousness, where the soul bids its final adieu to form. That means to nature, because nature is the hub of form. See, all form is created in prakriti, or unmanifested prakriti. When it's in unmanifested prakriti, if you remember, it's invisible. That is, it's formless form. It's ideas. Remember last week we had the 4 stages of the word, and we looked at that. It's sort of like that. Starts at a supreme level, goes to a ideation level, comes to a fully manifested thought level, and then finally comes to a gross level where objects appear. And you take it back in, and it goes back to the supreme, just like Ramakrishna said in this quote we just had. So you can look at it like that. Kaivalya would then correlate with a stage of, as I said, saying goodbye to all form. The soul realizes that it must isolate itself, because that's the English word that the seers and sages use in English for Kaivalya, isolation. So it's a teaching that's rather difficult to swallow, because most beings are very attached to nature. In fact, they're far too attached to nature. Let's just put it that way. They're attached to objects, and objects get stolen, they decay, you become bored with them, and so they break and so forth. They go away. So you should not become attached to things that are non-eternal. You should just custodian them, you see. You just sort of walk amongst them without getting attached to them. That would be the householder's way of living, is to live amongst the objects without getting attached to them. If you can do that, then fine. You actually can drink your milk from a brimming cup, as Ramakrishna says, like King Janaka did. But when it comes to deep spiritual realization, it has to brook on the formless. It has to come to that breach where formlessness is about to present itself to the soul. It's like the hailstone falling in the ocean. That's how Shankara described it so beautifully in his Viveka Chudamani. That ocean of Brahman, replete with the nectar-like swell of the Atman, into which my mind fell like a hailstone falling into an ocean. It's very beautiful, poetic, but of the highest realization at the same time. Very Upanishadic. They wanted to give you the supreme truths in a kind of poetic fashion, so that you had all the attraction that you needed to them. So you were drawn in by those words. We know that Maya is enchanting, and you get enchanted by nature and by forms and by pleasures. But we want to make God even more enchanting, more enthralling, and more enticing. So we're going to describe it to you in this way, you see. There's an ocean there. When it swells, it's taking on a form, and the wave is no different than the ocean. And your mind just falls like a hailstone into that Atman, and that Atman merges back into the ocean of Brahman, you see. And it swells again and merges. So, like black bumblebees coming in and out of Mother Kali's hair, you see, they say. It's her with a big hum, which is Om, you see. Very beautiful symbologies in this tradition, in the Tantra and in the Vedanta, those two streams. And in yoga, then, you can see then that they have pondered such great words like Kaivalya. Kaivalya then means isolation, and the bitter part of that pill is that if you're still attached to form, if you still think bodies are real, if you still think that you're going to live forever in the body, and those kinds of misconceptions, then you, number one, are very misguided, and number two, have not seen yet the beauty of the formless ocean of Brahman. You probably haven't even begun to contemplate it in 9 steps, you see, because that's what Om will do for you. You'll be able to contemplate God's Word. And in the beginning was the Word, but then the Word was with God. Om became, you saw the Word separate as the origin of all things. That's why Christianity is based on origins. But then origins get connected with God. Oh, I see, God in His one and His Word are together. But then, no, lo, lo, as Vivekananda says, they are one. In the beginning was with God, then it was the beginning, and then it was with God, then it was God. So all of a sudden, you see that Om is a doorway into formlessness, into formless Brahman. And now you see why everyone in that, from our founder all the way back to Shankara and Patanjali, said that Om is the way. Vivekananda said Om is the way. So everyone is going to see that, and they may see that Om as light. A lot of people follow the path of light, that's called Jyoti, but there's really no real difference between Shabda and Jyoti. In fact, I think those two words are on here somewhere. So you have this idea of some beings hearing the sound and some beings seeing the light. These beings are mystics, these beings are visionaries, you see. So the different temperaments of the spiritual seeker come into play there as to how they're going to see divine reality when they actually approach it. It's very beautiful, because then we get a very wide spectrum of the seers and saints explaining to us what they experienced in the scriptures, in the revealed scriptures, and we get a many-windowed look into this in God's chamber. My father's mansion may have many chambers, but it also has to have a lot of windows, you see. And those are the seers and sages which dwell there and which pass in and out of those chambers. So, getting a little bit long-winded in that explanation, Kaivalya is isolation from nature, where form is produced. It doesn't mean that nature is a bad thing, or that form is a bad thing, or that you have to give form up forever. It's just that when you see the beauty of formlessness of Brahman, your own self, then you will easily, like a moth to flame, give up form and get into a formless state. And when you do, and if you do, come back out of the formless state, when you do come into form, you will shine with the light of Brahman. And I end the first half of the class there with those words. Take 10 or 15 minutes while the live streaming audience can see this chart up close, because we'll be going through this in the second half. Thank you for your kind attentions. Aloha, namaste. In this, the second half of our third class on Shakta Advaita Vada, we are delving into the mysteries of divine reality as seen in the Shakta path, or the path of Divine Mother of the Universe, using this chart on my right, your left, as the main ground for her many atmospheres, for her many blissful principles and axioms and truth sayings and dharma, all spread there on a vast tapestry for the aspiring aspirant to delve into, just there for the taking, really, like gems at the bottom of the floor. But as we were saying in the first half, we have to make that deep dive, take that deep breath, make that one deep dive and penetrate the surface. Sri Ramakrishna used to say that the young child can never do a deep dive, doesn't know how to tuck and dive to break the surface of the water, so can't go underneath. So once you need to learn two things: how to do that tuck and dive and penetrate the surface of the water, and after taking a deep breath. So in spiritual life, it forms a fitting analogy that many people stay sort of on the surface of the teachings. You could call the surface of the teachings aparavidya, that is the lesser knowledge of sciences and mathematics and arts and crafts and things. Or you could also call it morality and ethics, sort of religious life, mundane, conventional religious life sometimes. But when you talk about spiritual life, you're really starting out with the Dharma. It's a very good word in both Hinduism and Buddhism, and Vedanta and Yoga use that word Dharma. So it's even coming into play in Dharma Mega Samadhi here as we begin to look at this 7 steps to the attainment of Kaivalya. So penetrating the surface then of Maya, or of appearances, if you want to put it in a more sort of hands-on way, we begin to gather up these jewels of Dharma that are there at the bottom of our dive and make them our own. Realize actually that they are really part and parcel of our own eternal knowledge, our own eternal wisdom. So that beings like Kaivalya, like Patanjali, whose teachings we're studying here, the first law of yoga really is all knowledge lies within you. So you have to start with that, or upon that premise, and begin to seek then. Seek and you shall find really means that, like Ecclesiastes said, there's nothing new under the sun. Everything has been wrought before. Everything that's been done earlier. So the wise being, from savant to sage to seer to savior, all knows this eternal wisdom is always existing within us, and we just need it perked or pricked by, in each lifetime maybe, by a wisdom teacher or wisdom tradition. And if you're bound to just a faith tradition, and the faith tradition is began to be founded only on mere belief, then that's where the wisdom tradition can particularly come in to save you and give you aqualung, as it were, to make this deep dive. You'll be able to dive deeper and have a greater capacity for drinking in this amrita, this nectar. One of these words that are here. We'll look into these things. And so the teaching of Kaivalya in yoga is a very high teaching. So I'm already asking you to be at a very deep depth of wisdom when I even introduce you to it. But we are starting Advaitically, Shakta Advaita Vada, at the top with Brahman, Atman, Om, and Hrim. And we're beginning to work our ways to the side and down. So, because that's the way really how Ramakrishna said, my most mature opinion in the matter. And so he sort of summated everything in the Gospel of Ramakrishna at one point, is that the soul starts at the Nitya, descends to the Leela, and then returns to the Nitya. So Nitya means eternal, Leela means sportive play. So the soul starts off as no soul at all, no division, or starts off as the soul, the all-pervasive consciousness, without any divisions. And then it takes on a form, comes through the word, and begins to come down. You can explain this all cosmologically, and I have many times with many charts. 261 to date. I finally found out the number today of my own charts. So you can explain it cosmologically, but as you come out into the word and consciousness begins to take on a form, then it's supposed to be engaged in what's called lila, or sportive play. So from the nitya to the lila and back to the nitya, that was Ramakrishna's most mature attitude. So I often put that together with his saying that, from the crown chakra to the third eye, to the throat, to the heart, these are all, metaphoric positions on the human form that connotate or in a correlation with spheres of consciousness that are very, very indrawn and begin to become more outward. So he would say, if the nitya for him would be the crown chakra and the lila for him would be down as far as the heart, but it would not encompass the navel, sexual organs, and the base of the spine, food and its digestion and all that. He said he would never come down that far. He said it only would come down to the heart, and from there give out the teachings in both directions. He'd give out the teachings to the gods and goddesses and the beings in the inner spheres who are taking teachings from great souls like him, avatars, but he would also emanate the teachings down into the lower spheres and right on down to earth. And he would even send his beloved son, Vivekananda, his spiritual son, right down into the materialism of the West to try and convince us of the spiritual nature of things, so that we could free ourselves from the problems that we're creating, the havoc we're creating, the violence we're creating, the karmas we're creating, and have a path to light in each age. From age to age, I embody myself forth to resurrect the Dharma and to destroy the old Dharma, as Krishna says in the Gita. So I'm asking you to start at a rather high level because that's your nature at a very high level. Consciousness is non-dual. Consciousness is formless. And we just have gotten so far away from thinking of it as that, and even further away from knowing it as that. So knowledge, knowing, you get the connection. We get reminded of our true nature by the teachings of the Dharma, just like we get reminded of the consistency of objects from quantum physics. So each has its own sphere and is to be looked at like facets of a diamond in its own sphere, and then you become well-rounded. Then later you can decide for yourself what's real and what's not real, if they're a god, if they're not a god, or if you want to even call it God or not. You'll know about the reality of things instead of just relativity. Or you'll come to know a little bit about people suffer in reality instead of just being in relativity instead of just being in reality. The seers will come down into form so that they can see how people are suffering and they can lead them out. Vivekananda said that. It may be, he said, I'll be very free once I get out of my body, but I will never stop returning. I will take on 1,000 births if I can only help one person out of suffering. So that kind of vow they will take. And that's even almost beyond a bodhisattva vow. That's the vow of a nitya siddha, an eternally perfect soul who doesn't need to go through stages of bodhisattvahood, has already reached a perfection, and yet is sacrificing that moksha and coming down through Kaivalya back into form so that it can convince you of your true nature and help you free yourself. That is, he's not going to do it for you. He's an exemplar, not a savior. He's going to tell you the truth, and you have to realize it for yourself. And then you will become realized in your own right. That's moksha. See? It's not salvation. It's moksha. It's different. Liberation is different than salvation, just like mind is different from brain. So these distinctions are very helpful. Dharma is different from morality. Teachings of the Dharma start where morality leaves off. See, so these are very important distinctions to make, and they are the deeper dives that we're talking about here in this metaphor. So, with that said, let's look into one of these deepest of all philosophical dives is the principle of Kaivalya. Now, I already told you that it means isolation, specifically from nature, because nature is where all form is birthed. Because you have basically mind and Maya and all these other things involved in the equation to get form, senses and material and so forth. But that's nature. Pretty much the idea of nature in Vedanta stretches from unmanifested nature all the way out to manifested nature. Unmanifested nature is the bulk of the iceberg under the surface of things, and then manifested nature is the tip of the iceberg that we see, taste, touch, hear, and smell. So there's so much under the surface that we don't see. And that's what's under the surface is a good analogy for unmanifested nature, everything that is not yet, everything that's held in abeyance and is in potential, but is not yet manifest itself. That's the cycle that Buddha wanted out of, and other beings saw, is everything's going from form to formlessness and back again. But the iceberg is held in a huge ocean, isn't it? And that's real formlessness there. It's being formed of ice that's solidifying and melting with this under the sunlight of awareness and Gyanam, melts it and it reforms again. But it's all happening inside this huge ocean of formlessness with a capital F, if you want to call it that. So it's that formlessness that's beyond nature. Tip of the iceberg, form with a small f. Bulk of the iceberg, formlessness with a small f. The ocean in which the iceberg is held, formlessness with a capital F. If you want to put it very simply, you see. So Kaivalya then would be getting off the iceberg. You're getting out of the cycle of being born again and again in form, and then taking a trip into formlessness, bereft of your consciousness, and then coming back into form, bereft of your consciousness, you see. Go back, how samskaras are formed and so forth, and how we get trapped in form, so that we don't, pretty soon we don't even know our formless nature. We don't even know what deep sleep is, and we go into it every night. We don't know what samadhi is, yet the seers that attend us by the dozens, by the hundreds every age, they know, and they tell us, but yet we can't find our way there, or we can't generate an interest. I call that apathy. So this Kaivalya then is a very high echelon of realization that's going to be necessary in order for, according to Patanjali, in order for the soul to experience asampragyata samadhi, which Vedanta calls nirvikalpa. Asampragyata and nirvikalpa, the same thing. One's a Vedantic term, one's a yogic term. And the samadhis with form are called savikalpa and sampragyata. Now, asampragyata means seedless. Sampragyata means with seeds. So you can see that pretty much form and formlessness is what they mean. Nirvikalpa means no kalpas, no time, no passage of time. Time is made extinct. You're beyond imaginations in time. And savikalpa means with imaginations in time, with conceptions in time, with fantasies in time. So you can see that one goes formless, mind stops thinking, no conceptions, no fantasies, no desires, no play, no sport. It's Advaita, and it's at its best. And then consciousness comes back out in sports and plays and gets itself involved with nature on all levels, from the kingdoms of heaven on out to earth. And that's called with form, with gunas, saguna. So this is why both these pillars on either side are so important to a more comprehensive view of truth in Vedanta, of God, of Brahman, of moksha and mukti, or Kaivalya. All of these words are very precious in terms of the states of consciousness in which the soul can find itself in any given lifetime, especially based on practice. Practice is kind of the cutting edge. Sadhana, we call it. Doing your yoga, your yogas. So, probably explaining it really nice if we say Vedavyas, the father of Vedanta, commenting on the father of yoga's system. Isn't that beautiful? So here we have Vedavyas, our own Vedantic father, saying, through union of the two principles of nature and soul comes the observation of their fundamental difference, resulting in realization of one's true essence. Stop right there. Say no more, say no more. See, That's enough right there. Through union of the two principles of nature and soul comes the observation of their fundamental difference. Hand me the... She's already headed towards it. Water and oil do not mix. Well, they look like they don't mix, but if you shake it, and we do this with the kids all the time, and you watch it for about 45 seconds, and make sure that's not 45 lifetimes to help you understand this fact, then you'll see that it's beginning to separate, you see, and nature and soul do not mix. That's kind of the teaching. So, not kind of, that is the teaching. It's the bit of hard pill that we have to swallow. But the amrita, the nectar at the end of the whole process is that you find yourself to be one with the bliss of the self. That bliss is only unalloyed and uninterrupted when it's formless. Have you noticed? Have you had uninterrupted, unalloyed bliss while you're in form? Has any soul been able to escape the suffering of death or the transformation of growth and birth? Everyone suffers under that regime. That's why the first noble truth of Buddhism is there is suffering. That's why Holy Mother told us the suffering of this world has gotten into the very marrow of my bones. And she can't see why, people go on suffering in it. She says, even sometimes the illumined souls go on rotting away in the body. I don't understand why they do that. See, her idea would be just to give it up. See, and you have to have some wherewithal to get out of the body consciously. You can't just give it up. We're not talking about suicide here. We're talking about a conscious departure from the body when the body is no longer of use to you. Old age, disease set in. See, so basically, Kaivalya is depicted very well in that little experiment of oil and water. And nature and soul have a relationship. They mix themselves up. But it's not always a very healthy, it's quite often an unholy mixture. You might have noticed by looking out in the world how many people are suffering in this thing we call nature, form. Birth, growth, disease, old age, decay, and death all take place in nature, Krishna says, but they do not take place in your soul. Your soul is never born, it never grows, it never expands, it never contracts, it never gets disease, and it never dies. Do I have to sing it? Because we sing that almost every time too when we sit down here. Namrichor na Shankara Name jati beda Pita naiva me naiva Mata marjanmaha. Namrichor, I have no death. Why? Because I never had a birth. Name jati beda. Pita naiva, I have no father. Pita. Mata majanmaha. Mata, I have no mother. Chirananda Rupaha Shivoham Shivoham. And you might as well end with the primal word Om, to put an exclamation point on this truth statement of Shankara. That's Shankara's 5th verse to the 6 verses on Nirvana. Somebody wrote a song on Nirvana, see. Their lyrics are much more profound than our radio, songs you hear on radio in the West, you see. They're singing about divine reality, either from the standpoint of lover and beloved, devotion and bhakti, and how much I love God, and how He's my heart, soul, and how I'm attracted there, and so forth. Or they're singing from the standpoint of this non-dual wisdom, like this. Na me, na, not, no, no, I'm none of that. I'm none of that. I'm not even lover and beloved. There is no distinction between me and divine reality, so how can there be a lover and a beloved? There's just oneness, and I love that. I love myself. Vivekananda said, I'm a Vedantist. I hardly found any other form of God anywhere than my own self. That's the way I started off the Sri Swami Vivekananda Vijnana Gita, the book of collected letters I put together into a song. I'm a Vedantist. I hardly find any other form of God anywhere than my own self. See? So he's not looking outside. He's looking inside for that truth of the soul. The indivisible soul, by the way. The birthless, deathless soul, by the way. So in order for a being to realize that, then isn't he going to have to reach a strata called Kaivalya, where he can actually knowingly and consciously separate himself out from form, from taking a birth, because that's where your form is incepted, in the fetus, right? Or from, if you're not taking a birth, then you're not going to have to separate yourself from anything at the time of death. And that's Advaita Vada right there, attached to this inner pillar. The path, Vada, of those who know that they're ajati, unborn. They know that they're never born and they never die, even when they come into a body. And that's Jivan Mukta. See, we had that a couple nights ago at our musical discourse. We had that teaching of Jivan Mukta, living liberated soul. Very powerful teaching in Vedanta. So, with truth sentiments like that, even put to music again, poetry and music, in order to entice the soul, invite the soul into this periphery of the Dharma, and just to immerse yourself in it. The glad tidings of truth teachings, you see. It's Christmas every day. And you're warmed constantly by this flow of teachings in your mind. You hardly know what the numbness of ignorance is. There's too much warmth flowing in you. So, I didn't get past one sentence, you see. Through union of the two principles of nature and soul comes observation of their fundamental difference. You can just use that as a mantra. But it results in realization of one's true essence. This process takes place when the Purusha, the indweller in the city of 9 gates, abandons its relationship with matter and mixes itself no more with nature. No more. See, I will not mix anymore. I will not shake it up, baby. I will not shake my booty. I will realize my buddhi. This is called Kaivalya, final isolation from the endless stream of phenomena caused by mind and intellect. Aha. Vedavyasa is giving us, in 3 sentences, the gist of all of philosophy. All of higher spirituality is right there in that quote. You see how beautiful. Because he lets us in the fact that this endless stream of phenomena is caused by the mind. And the mind is a part of nature, isn't it? Brain is certainly a part of nature, but mind still partakes of form. Wherever you find form, you find nature. You even find nature in a formless sense in the bulk of the iceberg, where the dinosaurs went and where they'll come back from again, where Elvis went and where he comes back from again, unless he's already come back, where Jesus went after he was resurrected and comes back again. You see, they all go back into unmanifested prakriti, and they come back again into manifested prakriti. Where your baby comes from and where your great-grandfather went to, that's the trade-off of form and formlessness all the time, and those are the cycles that concern the saints and the seers. They're concerned about those for you. That you get lost in them and never find your way out for hundreds of lifetimes. If you did that in bliss and glee, they'd leave you there happily. Like children playing in sandboxes. But you don't. You suffer there, you see. And you suffer necessary things, yes, like they all do who come into form, but you also suffer too many unnecessary things. And then that gives rise to all this unnecessary violence and conflict. And man becomes not mankind, but man unkind, as they say. See? And then life is a caricature of itself. What to speak of divine life, or even dharmic life, or even moral and ethical life, all of those are thrown to the winds, you see. And all we have is this life of suffering, of violence, of conflict, of confusion. And that's no life at all. That's Maya. The queen of all four-letter words. And now we're in trouble, you see. So these 3 or 4 things that Vedavyasa says in this first quote, just jot it down and memorize it. And remember that from day to day. Beautiful. And he says this and mentions the word Kaivalya, and then Vedavyas fleshes it out for us. Here are the steps. We don't really need to go too far into the Sanskrit of it, but we can just use the English. The very first is getting a wisdom transmission. He says, one whose buddhi, intelligence, is filled with the discriminating wisdom that springs from constantly trying to perceive the self, possesses the highest dispassion. So now it's his turn to borrow from Vedanta, you see. Now Vedavyas borrowed from yoga. Now yoga gives back to Vedanta, you see, because detachment and dispassion are the two pillars of Vedanta, really. Viveka, Vairagya, there they are. Viveka here, Vairagya here, right at her crest jewel. The two crest jewels, Viveka, Vairagya. Discrimination between the real and the unreal, and detachment from the unreal. Once you know what's real, you've separated the wheat from the chaff, then separate them out. Separate them out. We could do the same experience, you see, and call it lack of discrimination and discrimination. You must separate the wheat from the chaff, the real from the unreal. And once you find the real, detach from the unreal. It's a two-punch fight. 1-2 punch that puts ignorance to the mat forever. That's Vedanta's way of proceeding. So here he says, trying to perceive the spiritual self possessed of the highest dispassion. Dispassion means detachment. You get dispassion for things, and your passion goes towards realization of God. So this is a first step in that. Now, this happens after the 8 limbs have already been mostly understood, you see. You've done your yamas and your niyamas. You've done your asana and your pranayama. You've done your pratyahara and your dharana. And now you're getting to meditation, dhyan, and samadhi. So the first 6 limbs have pretty much been accomplished. And you're at that level of concern called dhyan yoga, meditation. And meditation is really wrapped up with its success in reaching the formless reality. If it's still just at the level of formlessness, sampragyata or savikalpa, you don't feel like you've reached the goal. You're having peace, you're having bliss, you're having wisdom, still doesn't satisfy the soul. All wisdom, worldly wisdom, lasts for only a little while, Vivekananda says, but spiritual wisdom lasts and satisfies forever. So you get this dharma, you get these teachings, and you take them to the utmost. You take them to the deepest point you can take them with that deep dive we were talking about, and then you start on this trip to Kaivalya. So these are 7 steps that happen at a very high level. You don't get a wisdom transmission just walking down the street every day in a state of ignorance. You're going to have to find a teacher, get a mantra, set your foot on the path, start dealing with your karmas, your samskaras, look into yourself, remake yourself, cut yourself in the image of the Spirit, however you talk about it. And then just when you thought you really had it together, you reach something like this. Oh, I see, I can't really pass it, the portals of form and into the ocean of formlessness until I separate myself out from my desire for form. I didn't even know that there was such a thing as a desire for form until they told me for it, because I didn't know there was anything such thing as a formless self. So this is what it says. Try to perceive the spiritual self. Then you'll know that there is such a thing as a formless nature. And it's going to be a formlessness with a uppercase F, right? Now, get the wisdom transmission. Remember, all of these 7 steps are in the attempt to try and get yourself beyond nature, beyond the ideation of air, water, fire, air, and earth. Earth, water, fire, ether, and earth. Those 5 elements, or earth, water, fire, air, and ether, if you want to put it from gross to subtle. Those kinds of things are not just the 5 elements that you see outside of yourself, but they're also thoughts in your mind. You have the thought of earth, you have the thought of water, you have the thought of fire. And those light up your dream state. You understand, right? You breathe in a dream state, and you fly in a dream state, so there must be air there. And you walk on different lands, so there must be earth there. You have these same 5 elements inside your head. And that's precisely why everything has come from the mind, marched outward and solidified itself here. And tonight you're just taking it back to its more subtle components. And your senses are the same. You see and taste and touch and hear in a dream too, just like you do out here. So these are all connected. There are 20 of them that are connected. 5 elements, 5 subtle elements, 5 senses, and 5 subtle senses, right? You have 20 there. And then a fourfold mind. That's the famous fourfold 24 cosmic principles, a simile of that. So remember then, I'm saying all of these 7 steps are taking place inside of that one bid to get into formlessness. You already reached a very high state of your awareness, and you finally are set and ready to get a wisdom transmission. See, people take teachings and they go away. See, and they come back and take them again, and they go away, and they come back and take them again. But they haven't done any preparation of their consciousness to receive those teachings yet. What do you think the teachings are going to do when they get into an impure mind? Probably drive some people crazy, you see. So you qualify yourself, make yourself a ready and fit receptacle, then you go and take the transmission, and the whole thing is over in a matter of days, weeks, or years. You've got the idea, you're on the path. You've been launched. Your ship has been launched and you can sail. So qualification is a very important thing, so I'm saying that's what's happened already to this person who's seeking Kaivalya. Now the second step is khyati. Discernment and clarity comes to you. Patanjali says, the highest type of dispassion is clarity of knowledge, called prasad. Funny, we all thought prasad was sanctified food. Now we find that there's a sanctified food for the mind too. When it arises, khyati rises with it, and the yogi eliminates suffering, attains everything, and snaps the chain of rebirth. Here's what he's looking for. Oh, snapper of this birth, of this life's chains, you see, as a song they sing to Sri Ramakrishna. Whenever the avatar comes, he will give you those teachings which snap the chain of rebirth with all its links. The Buddhists call it nidanas, all the links that are routing you back into samsara, based upon 3 lifetime scenario, according to the Buddhists. A life to develop the karma, a life to realize that you have it, and a life to get rid of it, basically. So that's the way some Buddhist schools would describe it, called the nidanas. One of the 3 or 4 main Buddhist precepts. Praticca samutpata, the interdependence of all things, and the fourfold truths and the eightfold noble path, and the nidanas. These are some of the main basic Buddhist precepts that you learn that go hand in hand with Vedanta and yoga. And Father of Yoga was supposed to have been very influenced by Buddha, and you can see some of those teachings in his 8-limbed yoga. So get khyati, wisdom transmission and khyati. Then Dharma Mega Samadhi happens. That's a very beautiful state. You see it in certain souls. It's called the rain cloud of virtues. If you were a person that was a candidate for Dharma Mega Samadhi and you'd actually start to attain it, then you would all of a sudden give up looking for all those things outside of you, all those virtues, and they would all of a sudden naturally arise in you. A good voice, understanding of the scriptures, a clear complexion, a healthy body, on all levels, physical, mental, psychological, philosophical. The rain cloud of virtues falls inside of you. Dharma Mega Samadhi. It's a kind of samadhi all its own, and it's beginning to qualify you for your divorce from nature. You're going to the high court, you see, and the judge there is going to want to know that you've had Dharma Mega Samadhi so you can put your divorce through, you see. Now, Malavinasha, some of these will surprise you because you'll realize how deep ignorance is in the soul. It's called Mula Vidya. Mula Vidya means root ignorance. It means that the soul, the idea of an individual soul is really formed in ignorance. There is no such thing as an individual soul. There's only one soul. It's homogeneous. It's all-pervasive. It's birthless, deathless, as we've said. It's full of wisdom. It has Dharma Mega Samadhi in it. Everything is in it. And you're still laboring under the idea that you're a part of it, or a spark from it, a spark from the fire. That's qualified non-dualism. We'll give it to you. It's a station. But you haven't yet come upon the marvels of non-duality yet, like Vivekananda realized. See, there all of a sudden I and my Father are one. Tat Tvamasi, that thou art. You have these startling realizations of the oneness, or put it more like not two-ness of reality, because you can't limit it to oneness. So we're talking about, when we get into these next ones, you'll be surprised. Mala Vinasha and Guna Vaitrishnam, that the Mala imperfections and their destruction, Vinasha, and the Gunas, Rajas, Tamas, and Sattva, are very deep in you. And when you transcend your desire for form in nature, that's when you will get rid of your imperfections and the gunas, not until. That's why the Swami who took the name Swami Trigunatitananda, one of the direct disciples, 16 direct disciples of Ramakrishna, was very astute in his name selecting. So I think I'll name myself the bliss of transcending the three gunas. So he already puts himself right there on the map, you see. And he's only got 3 or 4 more steps to get to Nirvikalpa Samadhi, you see, formless Samadhi. He knows that the gunas are one of the last things to go because they were one of the first things to come, you see. When the gunas were in equilibrium, everything was fine. But as soon as they were thrown into disequilibrium, everything started spilling out and vibrating. It's one of the ancient teachings of the gunas, particular to Vedanta. All the way down to this mind, how it goes through slothfulness, restlessness, and balance every day, all the time, probably every minute. And you'll only know that if you watch it in meditation. Otherwise, you'll just feel it and you'll say, oh, I was in a bad mood last couple hours ago. I'm fine now. So I was restless for a while. Now I'm really lazy. But so you call it a mood, but they call it a mode of nature. And it's not your fault. It's not something that necessarily you're inviting unto yourself. It's something that happens to every mind. Why do you think they experience the dark night of the soul? See, if there isn't the gunas in them still. See? But they've learned marvelously how to detach from them. See, isn't these first 2 steps all about detachment and dispassion? So they've realized that. We still identify ourselves with the gunas when they happen to us. Oh, I'm depressed. I think I'll get more depressed. Oh, I'm restless. I think I'll just keep being restless, you see. I'll spin my wheels more. Like the dog sees the car coming at, instead of running away from it, runs towards it. Oh, I think I'll run toward that moving object. See? Stupidity. So, this ignorance that attends us at a very root level is going to be something we need to X out of the equation, and that's only going to happen when we can transcend form. Form it's available to form. Ignorance is available to form the minute it takes its inception. We have to realize that about forms, all forms, even the forms of the gods. We don't want to go there, see. We want beyond the gods and goddesses, because the Atman is formless, and that's our true nature. The gods are fixed in their positions for hundreds and thousands of years, maybe ages. They can't get out of that particular form. We're lucky. We only have to spend 80 years in a form. See, have you become so ingratiated to your own form that you want to stay here all the time? Or is there a part of you that's saying, like Vivekananda, oh, it might be very true that I'll feel very free as soon as I drop this body. Do you have that feeling in you? If you have that feeling, then you have spirituality developed somewhere inside of you. But if you're clinging to the body, that's called abhinivesha. And according to the father of yoga, that's the 5th and lowest of all hells that the soul can fall into, called fear of death. The 5th and lowest hell you can fall into. Where Shankara himself is singing, Na mrityur na shanka na me jati beda. I have no birth, I have no death, I'm free, you see. So I'm preparing you for the next two steps here. Mali Vinasha and Guna Vaitrishnam, you'll take them in one gulp. Destruction of blemishes. He says, luminosity is the self-nature of sattvic buddhi. With impurity removed from it, its flow is pure and proficient, unsubjugated by the presence of rajas and tamas. So, already mentioning the three gunas there in the ridding yourself of malas. Now, the tantric look at malas are that mala means imperfection. We're not talking about the mala beads that you're wearing around your neck or using for mantra practice. Mala in Tantra, that Sanskrit word means imperfection. So the idea in Tantra is that the soul is born with these imperfections. That is, the mind, anything that's born is born with these imperfections. The Atman is never born, so it doesn't have these. Let's just make sure we remember that. But anything that's born or takes on a form is invested with these malas right out the gate, you see. And the gunas would be three of them, always vying for supremacy. Sometimes I'm restless, sometimes I'm tired, sometimes I'm balanced. Always going around in cycles till the soul gets world weary, see, hopefully, and just doesn't put up with them forever. So these three gunas are there, and mala vinasha, vinasha means to destroy them, destroy your dependence upon them, because based on the fact that when you get Kaivalya, freedom from nature, you will get into a state of asampragata samadhi, that the sun is shining on that word right now, you see, coming in from our Hawaiian sun, is shining on asampragata samadhi, perfect, you see. So you will get into that state of seedless samadhi when you get rid of these seeds, these sort of mixed pure, impure seeds of gunas. And let's look what the next one details that further. Dispassion toward the gunas, guna vaitrishyam. Freedom dawns when the craving for the gunas and the attributes of nature ends, based on realization of the spiritual self, the purusha. That's that, another word for Atman. So there's a craving for these gunas, there's a craving for nature that the soul has, and it has a hard time satisfying it. It wants to come back, zest for life, thirst for life. You know what Vivekananda said about it in his poem, this thirst for life forever quench, it drags from birth to death and death to birth to soul. Just one sentence out of his poem, Sangha Sannyasa. This thirst for life forever quench, for it drags from birth to death and death to birth to soul. A soul that's in a transmigratory process, not the Atman that's standing back as the witness, watching a simile of itself, a semblance of itself, going from birth to death and death to birth, and saying to it all the time, why are you doing that, fool? Why don't you come and inhabit the highest limb of yoga with me? Like a bird with beautiful plumage. We'll be two birds on the same tree in the highest limb of yoga together. No more birth and death for me in the womb of matter, only emanation from my Divine Mother. That's how Ramprasad puts it. So put Vivekananda's saying next to Ramprasad's. This thirst for life forever quench, it drags from birth to death and death to birth to soul. No more birth for me in the womb of matter, only emanation from my Divine Mother. See? So one has the monastic view, get done with the whole shooting match. The other has the, if I come back at all, it's going to be as a wisdom ray from the Mother herself, on her auspice. So, malas, imperfections, and gunas, this is where you will get over them. Get over it, my teacher used to say. Oh, I haven't been feeling very well today, Swami. Get over it, he'd say. Right now, you have my permission. You see, you don't need to stay there any longer with these gunas playing with you, or you playing with the gunas, you see. Just be yourself, every day, every moment. Be in yoga. Why not? So that's step 4 and 5. Step 6 and 7 are more toward the essence of the thing, jnana prasad. Now, he mentioned that earlier, right? That there was a prasad that happens when khyati happens. That is, clarity happens when this wisdom is taken and you get real clear on the matter. It's like, if thine eye be single, you should know the truth kind of clarity. So now he's saying, let's call the sixth step, arrival at jnana prasad. Now you have it. Destruction of karma and other obstacles is what you can do with it. He says, when knowledge is at its purest, even the subtlest impediments like karma from previous births get obliterated. This is the culmination of perfection and ushers in an end to even the thought of form. Remember that problem you were having back here when you were meditating on Om? How you couldn't get away from the thoughts of form and objects and so forth? Well, here, Patanjali is letting you know this is the end of that problem for you. You can now put it to rest, put it to bed, tuck it in, leave it, turn off the light, go away, and never come back. You see, leave it on its own auspice. Turn the gunas to the gunas from which they sprang. Return nature to form from which it sprang, and go to your own formless nature. Ushers in an end to even the thought of form. So now you've got what Vedanta calls samadhana, the ability to meditate on God and only God with no other distractions. The seers are marvelous like that. When it's time for meditation, they can shut down the books, the duties, the running of the ashram, the running of the monastery with its hundreds and hundreds of monks. Because our teacher, whose picture is on the ashram there, our teacher's teacher did that. Shut all that off, and all the details of the day, and all the worries, and all the problems that people are coming to him with in his daily interviews and so forth, and he can just sit down in meditation and think of Brahman alone. All the rest of that's unreal. Only this is real. That's called samadhana. It's the fifth of 6 jewels in Vedanta. And those 6 jewels lie inside the 4 treasures, which are, 2 of them are Viveka and Vairagya. It's a beautiful system. We'll look at that. It's called here Shatsampat. Shatsampat is the 6 jewels. We'll look at that, the base of that pillar, next week or the week after. Stay tuned, because then you will have had a 7, maybe longer, week discourse on Divine Mother's internal peripheries, her atmospheres. Now, what else is in that quote? Karmas from previous births get obliterated. So this tells us that not only the roots of our imperfections and these gunas, which are at the inception of all form, are there at the very end of our road, but also the karmas from past lifetimes tend to hang on for a long time. People are surprised. I was surprised to find this out in the teachings. And I was wondering, I thought maybe those things expired long before you got samadhi. But I understood by studying these darshanas, the Nastika darshanas and the Nastika darshanas, that these things persist for a very long time. Sri Ramakrishna's teaching about burnt rope is great. People would come to him and say, I don't have that problem anymore, but I still think about that problem. See, so that's kind of what we're talking about here, subtle bondage. I don't really have that problem anymore, but I still think about it. That's, Ramakrishna would tell them, don't worry about that. A puff of wind will blow that away soon enough. What he's talking about is a burnt rope. It looks like a rope still, but it can't bind you anymore. In fact, if you go, the whole thing will fall apart before your very eyes. So you have this memory inside of yourself of deeds done, good, bad, and mixed. Those are basically setting up all your karmas, past, present, and future. I mean, you could probably make a case for connecting these up with the A, U, and M of Om too. You see, somewhere in the whole picture. So, if you're talking about past, present, and future karmas, Patanjali comes along and said, these past ones may persist for a while. They may persist, Ramakrishna says, as burnt strings or burnt ropes. You'll be aware of them still, but at some point the whiff of non-duality, the wind of non-duality will come along and just a mere puff will destroy them and you'll be free of them. And you'll be able to think about God and nothing else but God. So help you, God. And this is the beauty of the food of wisdom, jnana prasada, what you get fed at that level of spiritual understanding. And all you need to do is immerse yourself in it. Like we said this morning in satsang, my mind is a towel. Ramakrishna says, just dip that towel in the ocean over and over and over again until it's completely saturated. Don't even worry if I'm understanding it or not. Just saturate yourself in the ocean of wisdom. Wring it out later, you see. But just make sure that every day you saturate your mind in these teachings. There's a lot of debate going on between atheists and believers, between scientists and religionists. You might have seen them on the YouTubes and so forth. It's really all interesting, but it's really kind of futile. All you really need to do is put your mind on the teachings. You don't have to believe in God or not believe in God. Of these Astika Darshanas, of which are 6, probably at least 2 of them, these are traditional, means Astika means traditional, Yoga, Vedanta, Samkhya, well, and then Nastika means Buddhism and Jainism and so forth. Of all of those darshanas, probably half of them don't necessarily recommend, or not recommend, don't mean that it's an absolute necessity for you to believe in God. You don't need to believe in God to practice these darshanas. You don't need to be a believer. Yoga, Patanjali hardly mentions God in all the sutras. I think once he mentions Ishvara. Kapila in his Samkhya philosophy never mentions it. Buddha never mentions it. See, so it's not like you have to be some believer or be saved from something, from some devil because you don't believe. That's silliness, you see. All you need to do is put your mind in the teachings. Debate isn't necessary, disagreement isn't necessary, winning isn't necessary, losing isn't a problem. You just put your mind in the teachings for a long, long, long time. And all those problems go away. This is the transmission of wisdom you start with that turns into jnana prasada. Actual possession of wisdom. Whereas you were getting it transmitted from some other source before, right? Now it's yours. Sri Ramakrishna said, and I chanted at the beginning of this class a sloka that's sort of like it, some people have never heard of milk, and some people have heard of it, but some people have tasted it. So those people who have never heard of milk have never heard of Brahman or God, you see. And those who have heard of it, they neither believe nor disbelieve yet. But those who have tasted it, they know. But then there's those who own a dairy. See? They can hand it out in droves, in gallons, in quarts, in gallons, in flows. The milk of the Gita can flow to the young calves of the spiritual aspirants. That's in the Gita Jnanam. You can read about it, the beginning of the Gita. So that point is only to illustrate that once wisdom is yours, you realize you're on the brink of realizing Kaivalya. Kaivalya then would be, there it is, a sampragyata. That's here, you see, and that will segue me next week into talking about sampragyata and asampragyata, and we'll also take up moksha, freedom, eternal freedom, not a freedom that's gained over time. So there you see, asampragyata is the 7-step attainment of non-dual samadhi. So this is how this masterful father of yoga, we know already that he's systematized the yoga and put it into 8 limbs for us and discoursed on all 8 limbs and every facet of all 8 limbs in a most marvelous way. There's probably no more complex and deep and profound system of philosophy than yoga. maybe Tantra, but Tantra was never systematized. At least Patanjali came along and systematized yoga. At the same time we say that, we can say that if you just look at one aspect of the limb of yoga, you'll find this word Kaivalya and a whole set of steps that have to be followed in it. You see, the spiritual life is the razor's edge, right? It's the razor's edge path. You can't deviate from it. You have to follow it to the T. My teacher would actually shout at us in the ashram, follow the tradition. If he thought we were getting off the tradition in any little way, he would get us back on the razor's edge path. Follow the tradition. He'd shout it out loud, many times a day if necessary. So he wanted to make sure we stuck with it. Stick-to-itiveness, they call it, you see. Because the problem is this wavering consciousness, that chanchala vritti, this mind that wavers and stays for a little bit, straw on fire, burns out, and then goes off to some other direction, you see. So it never gets very deep into anything. It's not that we want you to be just Vedantists or just yogis or just Tantrists or just Indian, you see, Indian philosophy. Whatever religion you're in, stick to it and go deep in it. Don't stick to it and stay shallow. So I would say that if you're in yoga and Vedanta, there's no way you can be shallow, because you're not starting at Vedanta 101 or Yoga 101. You're already deep. When you take up any of these teachings in the Mother Path, you're already deep. And it's not a deep that means I believe or I don't believe, or I have faith or I don't have faith. It's just like, oh my God, see, or in this case, oh my goddess. See, look how much is in you. There's a song in India they sing about her. It says, Mother doesn't even know the extent of her own wisdom. So vast it is. See? She doesn't even know the extent of her own wisdom. It's just vast and spontaneous, bubbling up like a spring of ambrosia all the time, fresh, new, taking on ever-fresh permutations, you see, working its way down. Vivekananda said, I can equate truth to the most corrosive substance in the world. It will burn through everything. But it burns through solid substances, it'll take longer. So when it comes down to this earth, which is the most solid substance you can get, vibrationally speaking, it's going to take some time to work itself into our minds. But teachings like this will help it work in. And if necessary, we'll push it in. Holy Mother said, some people go to the cold pool for their morning bath and they stick their toe in. See? They stick 2 toes in and half their foot. You see? They get used to the water that way. Another person just goes and dives in, gets it all done at once. Another person is standing there wondering what to do, and somebody comes behind him and pushes him in. You see? So if whatever it takes, we'll push you in if necessary to get you wet. Because the dryness of intellectual, secular knowledge alone is not doing it. Nor is the over-sentimental bhakti, you see, the conventional religious wisdom doing it either. You see, the faith-based traditions that are just talking about praying once a day at meals and going to church once a week. That's not doing it. It's not religion with a capital R. It's religion with a small r, or conventional religion. But true religion with a capital R, Vivekananda said, I want to bring that back. And I want to make it digestible so that even a baby can take it. And he describes it as Raja Yoga, this yoga here that Patanjali has. The yoga of action, how to do work selflessly. The yoga of meditation, which will get you into a non-dual samadhi. And the yoga of wisdom, which is what we are engaged in right now. This is mainly the Jnana Yoga. Jnana Prasada is what you're getting. Wisdom transmission. So they know this is the best way to get rid of ignorance, which is why Vivekananda brought Vedanta to the West. He looked at all the Astika systems, he looked at all the Nastika systems, and he said, I'm going to the West. What is the best thing to bring these people? He said, if I were to color them, I'd color them pink. They're not black, they're not tamasic. My country's a bit black right now. And they're not brown, combination, and they're not just pure red, rajas. They're not just restless. They're pink. They're a combination of red and white. So they're starting to lean towards balance, towards sattva, but they have a lot of frenetic activity mixed in with them. So what should I bring a culture like that? And he said, the Vedanta is what they need, especially the Advaita Vedanta. We should bring them that. And Advaita Vedanta will be the future religion of the world. There is no doubt about it. That's what he prophesied. So when you're qualifying yourself for non-dual wisdom, which is at the foundation of Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Samkhya Yoga, Patanjali's Yoga, Vedanta, and other Nyaya and Visheshika, all the various Ashtaka and Nashta systems, which we will look into. In this chart that I'm going to show you eventually, which is a new chart, all these different darshana systems will probably get you next week. Then you'll see that this was a great choice to bring us the Vedanta based in Advaita Vedanta. So we are studying the Shakta Advaita Vada path, which is a beautiful combination of his master's teaching, Shaktism, that he was a lover of Mother Kali, and an amalgam, an equal mixture of the Vedanta of the seers, the non-dual Vedanta of the great knowers of truth. So I hope that you are dipping the towel of your mind and drenching it in these teachings that are flowing at SRV ashrams for this last 3 weeks, and for the next 4 Sundays coming at least. We may even extend it longer because there's a lot to cover in her. Not that we'll ever reach the end of it. So at that point, I think, instead of, with only 10 minutes remaining, going into another chart, we will take up what's called moksha later, next week, and look into these Ashtaka and Nashtaka darshanas, which is a chart that none of you have seen yet. We will do that in accordance with this pillar, moksha, and with this whole nirguna side, all the way down to Ashtaka and Nashtaka, these systems of philosophy. And what's going to attend upon them is called pramana, the various ways you prove these systems. You prove the existence of God. Very, very wonderful, because many people say, prove it, prove it. And there is no proof for God. There is no proof for independent consciousness separate from nature. And we say, I beg to differ. There are at least 6 proofs in Vedanta which you can look at, and 2 in the Puranas, and some 6 in the Vaisheshika philosophy. So each of these philosophies have different ways of proof, which are very interesting to look into. They're not dry, as sometimes they're reputed to be. If they're presented in the right way, they'll be very illuminating for you and elucidate the subject very well. So those are the things we have to look forward to in next week and the next couple of weeks' classes. I hope you're all here, and I invite you to come and invite your friends, and live streaming too. We thank you for coming, and say namaste and aloha to you. And let's end then with a Sanskrit chant today. Om Sato, Om Sato Ma Sadgamoya, Tamaso Ma Joytir Gamoya, Mrityor Ma Amritam Gamoya, Abira Bira Mayeti, Rudrayate Dakshinamukam, Tenamam Pahinicham, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from lower truth to higher truth. Lead us from the unreal to the real. And lead us from the illusion of death to eternal life. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother of the universe, with thy sweet and benign presence. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, may peace be unto all. Om